Maria Santos had been working as a night shift security guard at the federal building for 3 years, and most people barely noticed her. At 45, with graying black hair pulled back in a neat bun and reading glasses perched on her nose, she moved through the marble corridors like a shadow. Her uniform was always pressed, her badge polished, and her rounds completed with military precision that no one seemed to appreciate or even recognize. To the government employees who worked late, she was just another face in the background. Someone who checked doors and signed visitors in and out of the building after hours. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. What they didn't know was that Maria Santos was a former Marine Force Reconnaissance operator with 12 years of specialized combat experience. She had conducted covert operations in 3 different theaters of war, earned a Navy Cross for extraordinary heroism under fire, and completed missions that were still classified at the highest levels of government. She had been part of an elite unit that operated behind enemy lines, gathering intelligence and conducting surgical strikes in situations where failure meant death and discovery meant international incidents. Her call sign had been Ghost, earned after she successfully infiltrated and extracted intelligence from a terrorist compound without a single guard knowing she had been there. But after retiring from active duty, Maria had chosen anonymity. She'd moved to Washington, D.C., found a quiet apartment near the federal district, and taken the security job because it kept her close to the world she'd once known without requiring her to be part of it. She liked the solitude of night shifts, the routine of checking empty offices, and the fact that she could serve her country in a small way without anyone asking questions about her past. When people occasionally inquired about her background, she would simply smile and say she used to work for the government. The truth about her service record remained buried beneath her humble exterior, filed away in classified databases that few people had clearance to access. Her co-workers at the security company respected her reliability but found her somewhat mysterious. Frank Martinez, the day shift supervisor, had mentioned to others that Maria never talked about family, never seemed to have personal phone calls, and had an odd habit of automatically checking exit routes whenever she entered a room. "She's professional," he would say, "but there's something different about her. Like she's always watching for something the rest of us can't see." Sarah Kim, the weekend guard who sometimes overlapped with Maria's shifts, had noticed that Maria's physical fitness was unusual for someone in her 40s working a sedentary job. She moved with a fluid grace that suggested extensive training, and her awareness of her surroundings was almost supernatural. The federal building where Maria worked housed multiple government agencies, including a regional operations center for the Department of Homeland Security. Most of the building's occupants were administrators, analysts, and support staff who worked regular business hours and rarely interacted with the security personnel. Maria preferred it that way. She could complete her rounds, monitor the security cameras, and maintain the building's safety without drawing attention to herself. Her supervisor, Robert Chun, considered her his most dependable employee. In 3 years, she had never missed a shift, never filed a complaint, and never failed to notice when something was out of place. What Maria's colleagues didn't understand was that her vigilance came from years of training, where a moment's inattention could mean the difference between life and death. During her time with Force Reconnaissance, she had learned to process environmental information at a subconscious level, constantly assessing threats, escape routes, and tactical advantages. These skills had become so ingrained that she couldn't turn them off, even in the relative safety of a federal office building. She knew the location of every fire extinguisher, every emergency exit, and every potential choke point in the building. She had memorized the schedules of the cleaning crews, the patterns of the late working employees, and the rhythms of the building's mechanical systems. On this particular evening, as Maria began her 11 p.m. rounds, She had no idea that her carefully constructed quiet life was about to be shattered. The building seemed normal as she walked through the corridors, checking doors and verifying that sensitive areas were properly secured. The Department of Homeland Security's Regional Operations Center was dark, its personnel having gone home. Hours earlier, the Intelligence Analysis Division was empty except for the soft hum of computer servers processing data through the night. Everything appeared routine, exactly the way Maria preferred it, but in a secure conference room on the building's 7th floor, an emergency meeting was taking place that would soon change everything. Director James Wellington of the DHS Regional Office was facing the worst crisis of his career. Intelligence reports had confirmed that a terrorist cell had acquired detailed plans of a critical infrastructure facility and was planning an attack within the next 48 hours. The target was a water treatment plant that served over 2 million people in the metropolitan area. If the attack succeeded, it would contaminate the water supply with a biological agent that could kill thousands and create widespread panic. Problem was that the facility where the terrorists were planning their attack was in an extremely remote location, surrounded by difficult terrain and heavily defended. Every conventional approach had been analyzed and deemed unfeasible. The military couldn't launch an overt assault without risking international complications. Special operations units were tied up in other critical missions overseas. Local law enforcement lacked the specialized training and equipment needed for such a complex operation. Time was running out, and traditional solutions were proving inadequate. 3 separate intelligence agencies had confirmed the threat, but none had been able to develop a workable plan for stopping it. The facility was located in a mountainous region with only one access road, which was heavily monitored by the terrorist cell. Aerial approaches were impossible due to sophisticated anti-aircraft systems the group had acquired. Underground access was blocked by natural barriers that would take weeks to circumvent. Every angle of attack had been studied, and every option seemed to lead to the same conclusion. Any direct assault would result in massive casualties and likely failure. Director Wellington had spent the last 6 hours in emergency meetings with representatives from the FBI, CIA, and Military Special Operations Command. The consensus was grim. They needed someone who could infiltrate the facility undetected, gather intelligence on the terrorists' exact plans, and either disable their operation or provide actionable intelligence for a targeted strike. But such a mission would require skills that very few people possessed: advanced combat training, expertise in covert operations, intimate knowledge of terrorist tactics, and the ability to operate completely alone in hostile territory. The person they needed would have to be someone who could blend into the local population, navigate dangerous terrain without support, and complete the mission even if everything went wrong. They would need to be expendable in the bureaucratic sense, someone whose loss wouldn't create political complications or international incidents. Most importantly, they would need to be someone willing to accept what everyone was calling a suicide mission, because the chances of survival were estimated at less than 15%. As Maria completed her first round of the evening, checking the locks on the offices and ensuring that all security protocols were being followed, she remained unaware that her name was about to surface in a classified database search. The intelligence analysts working on the crisis had begun running queries for personnel with the specific skill set needed for the mission. They were looking for someone with force reconnaissance experience, someone with a proven track record in covert operations, and someone who was currently available for immediate deployment. The search parameters were extremely narrow. They needed someone with mountain warfare training, someone who had experience operating in hostile territory without support, and someone who had demonstrated the ability to adapt quickly to changing situations. The computer systems began cross-referencing military service records, security clearances, and current employment status. Most of the qualified candidates were either already deployed overseas, working in positions too sensitive to abandon, or no longer physically capable of such demanding operations. Maria's file appeared on the screen with a security classification. That immediately caught attention. Her service record showed extensive experience in exactly the type of mission they were contemplating. She had successfully completed solo infiltration operations, demonstrated expertise in mountain warfare, and earned commendations for her ability to gather intelligence in the most dangerous circumstances. But according to her current employment records, she was working as a night shift security guard in the very building where the emergency meeting was taking place. The irony was not lost on the analysts. The person they needed to save millions of lives was walking the halls just a few floors below them, checking door locks and monitoring security cameras. But her humble current position made it difficult for them to believe that she was the same person whose classified file read like something from a military thriller. The disconnect between her current role and her past achievements was so dramatic that several team members questioned whether the database had made an error. Director Wellington studied Maria's file with growing amazement. Her military record was extraordinary, filled with successful missions that had saved countless lives and prevented multiple international incidents. She had been awarded medals for valor that most soldiers only dreamed of earning. Her psychological evaluations indicated exceptional mental toughness and decision-making ability under extreme stress. Yet for the past 3 years, she had been working quietly in the building's security department, apparently content with a job that required none of her exceptional skills. The more Wellington read, the more convinced he became that Maria Santos might be exactly what they needed. But he also understood that approaching her would be complicated. She had clearly chosen her current path for personal reasons, and asking her to return to the world of covert operations would be asking her to risk everything she had built since leaving the military. The mission they had in mind was dangerous, enough that even someone with her skills and experience might not survive it. As the emergency meeting continued into the night, Maria completed her rounds without any awareness of the discussions taking place above her. She checked the temperature controls, verified that all computers were properly secured, and ensured that the building's various security systems were functioning normally. Her routine was methodical and thorough, reflecting the discipline that had made her such an effective Marine. She moved through the building with the quiet confidence of someone who knew exactly what she was doing, even if no one else recognized the level of skill required to do it so well. The emergency team had reached a consensus. They needed to approach Maria Santos immediately. Time was running out, and she was their best hope for preventing a catastrophe that could claim thousands of lives. But they also knew that what they were about to ask of her would test every skill she had ever learned, and push her to the absolute limits of human capability. They were about to ask her to volunteer for a mission that everyone agreed was almost certainly suicide, and they were about to discover that some people are willing to risk everything when lives hang in the balance. The crisis had been building for weeks, though most of the government officials involved had only learned about it in the past 48 hours. 3 months earlier, intelligence operatives had intercepted communications suggesting that a sophisticated terrorist organization was planning something significant on American soil. The chatter was different from the usual threats that crossed analysts' desks daily. This group demonstrated technical knowledge that indicated serious planning and access to resources that most terrorist cells could only dream of acquiring. The organization called itself the New Dawn Coalition, and unlike many extremist groups that relied on crude improvised weapons, they had somehow gained access to military-grade equipment and advanced chemical compounds. Initial investigations revealed that several members had engineering backgrounds, and at least 2 had worked for water treatment facilities in other countries before disappearing from their jobs 6 months ago. The combination of technical expertise and ideological extremism created a threat profile that kept counterterrorism analysts awake at night. Dr. Sarah Blackwood, the lead intelligence analyst for the Department of Homeland Security's Threat Assessment Division, had been tracking the group's activities across multiple databases and international intelligence networks. What she discovered painted a terrifying picture of methodical planning and careful resource acquisition. The group had been systematically gathering information about critical infrastructure across the eastern United States, with particular focus on water treatment facilities that served major metropolitan areas. The breakthrough came when NSA cryptographers finally cracked the group's communication encryption. The decoded messages revealed that the New Dawn Coalition had identified their primary target, the Riverside Regional Water Treatment Facility, which processed and distributed clean water to over 2 million people across 3 states. The facility was located in a remote mountainous area of Virginia, chosen decades ago for its strategic position, near multiple water sources and its relative isolation from populated areas. What made this target particularly devastating was the coalition's plan to introduce an engineered biological agent into the water supply. Intelligence reports indicated they had acquired samples of a modified strain of bacteria that could survive the standard chlorination process used by most treatment facilities. If successfully introduced into the system, the contamination would spread through the entire distribution network before anyone realized what had happened. The death toll could reach into the hundreds of thousands, with millions more requiring immediate medical attention. The facility itself had been designed with security in mind, but its defenses were intended to prevent vandalism and minor sabotage, not a coordinated assault by a well-equipped terrorist organization. The perimeter was protected by standard chain-link fencing with some electronic monitoring, but the real security came from its remote location. The facility sat in a valley surrounded by steep mountainous terrain, accessible only by a single winding road that could be easily monitored and defended. Dr. Blackwood's analysis revealed that the New Dawn Coalition had been studying the facility for months. They had somehow obtained detailed architectural plans, staff schedules, and security protocols. Surveillance footage from nearby areas showed suspicious activity consistent with reconnaissance operations. Most disturbing of all, intercepts suggested that they had identified specific vulnerabilities in the facility's filtration systems that would allow them to introduce their biological agent with maximum effectiveness. The timeline was devastating in its precision. The coalition planned to strike during the facility's monthly maintenance cycle, when staffing would be reduced and certain security systems would be temporarily offline. This maintenance was scheduled to begin in exactly 38 hours, creating an impossibly narrow window for any defensive action. Intelligence indicated that the attack team was already in position, having established a staging area in an abandoned mining complex approximately 15 miles from the target facility. Federal law enforcement agencies had mobilized every available resource, but the challenges were overwhelming. The remote location that made the facility defensible also made it nearly impossible to approach undetected. The single access road was being monitored by the terrorist team using sophisticated electronic surveillance equipment. Any conventional law enforcement or military approach would be detected long before it could reach the facility, giving the terrorists time to execute their plan and escape. FBI tactical teams had conducted detailed analysis of potential assault strategies, but every scenario ended in failure. A direct approach along the access road would result in the team being ambushed in terrain that heavily favored the defenders. Helicopter insertion was impossible due to anti-aircraft missiles that the coalition had apparently acquired through black market arms dealers. The surrounding mountains were too steep and heavily forested for effective deployment of ground forces, and the time required to position personnel would exceed their operational window. Colonel Patricia Hayes, the military liaison assigned to the crisis response team, had exhausted every conventional option in her tactical playbook. Her special operations contacts were either deployed in critical missions overseas or tied up in other domestic security operations. The few available units lacked the specific mountain warfare training needed for the terrain around the target. Facility. Even if qualified personnel could be assembled, the logistics of moving them into position without detection would require more time than they had available. The intelligence picture became even more grim when electronic surveillance revealed the full extent of the coalition's preparations. They had established multiple observation posts along the access road, created communication networks that would allow them to coordinate their response to any approach, and positioned explosive devices that could block the road and trap any assault force in kill zones. The terrorist team consisted of at least 12 highly trained individuals, many with military backgrounds, who had spent weeks preparing defensive positions in terrain they knew intimately. Director Wellington found himself facing an impossible decision. Every expert consulted had reached the same conclusion. There was no feasible way to prevent the attack using conventional methods. The facility could be evacuated, but doing so would alert the terrorists and likely cause them to accelerate their timeline or shift to an alternative target. The water treatment system could be shut down temporarily, but that would leave millions of people without clean water and create a different kind of humanitarian crisis. The breakthrough moment came when Dr. Blackwood's team identified a potential vulnerability in the coalition's operational security. Their surveillance network was focused on detecting large-scale military approaches, but it might be possible for a single individual to infiltrate their perimeter undetected. The abandoned mining complex where they had established their base was accessible through old mining tunnels that didn't appear on any current maps, but were documented in historical surveys from the 1940s. The tunnel system was treacherous, partially collapsed in several places, and would require someone with exceptional physical conditioning and climbing skills to navigate. Even if successful, the infiltrator would emerge inside the coalition's defensive perimeter with no support and no extraction plan. They would need to gather intelligence on the terrorist team's exact plans, identify the specific biological agent being used, and either sabotage the operation directly or provide actionable intelligence for a targeted strike. The mission requirements were staggering in their complexity. The operative would need extensive experience in solo infiltration operations, expertise in mountain warfare and tunnel navigation, the ability to identify and assess biological weapons, and the combat skills to engage multiple trained adversaries if discovered. They would need to operate without communication support, carry minimal equipment to avoid detection, and complete their objectives knowing that extraction was unlikely. Intelligence. Analysts ran database searches looking for anyone with the required combination of skills and experience. The search parameters were so specific that only a handful of names appeared, and most of those individuals were either unavailable or no longer physically capable of such demanding operations. The few candidates who met the technical requirements were deemed too valuable to risk on what everyone acknowledged was essentially a suicide mission. The discussion grew increasingly desperate as the 38-hour deadline approached. Alternative scenarios were explored and discarded. Emergency evacuation plans were developed, but judged inadequate to prevent massive casualties. International allies were contacted, but none had available resources that could be deployed quickly enough to make a difference. The realization began to settle over the emergency response team that they might be witnessing the beginning of the largest terrorist attack on American soil since September 11th. Dr. Blackwood continued refining her analysis of the infiltration route, using geological surveys and mining records to map the underground approach to the coalition staging area. The tunnel system was complex, with multiple branches and potential dead ends that could trap an infiltrator underground. Some passages were flooded, Others had unstable ceilings that could collapse without warning. Even with detailed maps, navigating the system would require someone with extensive underground experience and the ability to make critical decisions in complete darkness. The biological agent itself posed additional complications. Intelligence suggested that the coalition had modified the bacteria to be particularly resilient, capable of surviving in various environmental conditions while remaining lethal to human hosts. An infiltrator would need to identify the specific strain being used, determine how it was being stored and transported, and find a way to neutralize it without triggering defensive measures that could lead to its immediate deployment. Colonel Hayes had begun making preliminary contact with retired Special Operations personnel, hoping to find someone willing to volunteer for the mission despite its apparent impossibility. The conversations were difficult, as she found herself asking decorated veterans to consider sacrificing their lives for a mission with virtually no chance of success. Most declined immediately, not from cowardice but from realistic assessment of the operational parameters. As the emergency meeting stretched through the night, the weight of impending catastrophe settled over everyone involved. Millions of lives hung in the balance, and every conventional solution had been exhausted. The experts had done their jobs professionally and thoroughly, but the enemy had planned too well and chosen their target too carefully. The New Dawn Coalition was about to achieve something that would fundamentally change American society, and the people responsible for preventing such disasters were running out of time and options. The search continued for someone willing and able to attempt the impossible, someone whose skills and experience might give them a chance to succeed where conventional approaches had failed. Unknown to the emergency response team, the person they needed was completing her security rounds just a few floors below them, moving through the building with the quiet competence of someone who had spent years preparing for exactly this kind of mission. At 3:47 a.m., the emergency meeting had reached its darkest hour. Director Wellington sat at the head of the conference table, his face drawn with exhaustion and the weight of impossible decisions. Around him, representatives from 6 different agencies stared at maps, intelligence reports, and tactical assessments that all pointed to the same devastating conclusion. The New Dawn Coalition would succeed in their attack, and there was nothing conventional forces could do to stop them. Dr. Blackwood had just finished presenting her final analysis of the infiltration route through the abandoned mining tunnels. Her voice was steady, but her hands trembled slightly as she explained the technical details of what would be required. The operative would need to navigate approximately 2 miles of unstable underground passages, some partially flooded, others with ceiling clearances of less than 3 feet. Even with perfect navigation, the physical demands would be extreme. Colonel Hayes leaned forward, her military bearing unable to mask her growing desperation. "Doctor, even if we found someone capable of making that journey, what would they face when they emerged inside the coalition's perimeter?" The question hung in the air like a death sentence waiting to be pronounced. Based on our surveillance, at least 12 armed terrorists with military training, electronic countermeasures that would detect any standard communication equipment, and motion sensors positioned throughout their staging area. Dr. Blackwood's response was clinical, but everyone in the room understood what those words really meant. The operative would be completely alone, outgunned and operating without any possibility of backup or extraction. FBI Special Agent Rebecca Torres had been silent for most of the meeting, but now she spoke with the quiet intensity of someone who had spent her career confronting the worst of human nature. "We're talking about asking someone to volunteer for certain death. Even if they somehow managed to gather intelligence about the coalition's plans, how would they communicate that information back to us? How would they survive long enough to act on whatever they discovered?" The silence that followed her questions was profound. These were professionals who had dedicated their careers to protecting American lives, and they were being forced to confront the limits of their capabilities. The systems and procedures that had successfully prevented countless attacks were proving inadequate against an enemy that had planned with exceptional thoroughness and chosen their target with devastating precision. Director Wellington's phone buzzed with an urgent message from the White House. Situation room. The president had been briefed on the crisis and was demanding hourly updates on response efforts. The political pressure was immense, but it paled compared to the moral weight of knowing that millions of innocent people were counting on them to find a solution that might not exist. What about a preemptive strike on the staging area? Asked Agent Torres, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer. If we can identify their exact location, couldn't we use targeted military action to eliminate the threat? Colonel Hayes shook her head grimly. We've war-gamed every possible assault scenario. The terrain heavily favors the defenders, and they've positioned themselves to detect any approaching force long before we could get within striking distance. A failed assault would only trigger them to accelerate their timeline or shift to an alternative target we haven't identified. Dr. Blackwood pulled up satellite imagery on the main screen, showing the mountainous terrain surrounding both the water treatment facility and the coalition staging area. The geography told the story more clearly than any tactical assessment. Deep valleys, steep ridges, and dense forest coverage created natural barriers that made conventional military operations nearly impossible. The terrorists had chosen their position with the skill of professional military planners. There's something else we need to consider, said Dr. Blackwood, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. Our intelligence suggests that the coalition has prepared contingency plans for multiple scenarios. If they detect any unusual activity around their target, they may abandon the water treatment facility and shift to secondary targets in populated areas where they could cause immediate casualties. The implications of this revelation sent a chill through the room. The team had been so focused on protecting the water supply that they hadn't fully considered the possibility of the terrorists adapting their plans in real time. The coalition's sophistication and preparation suggested they were capable of exactly that kind of tactical flexibility. Agent Torres reviewed the psychological profiles that had been developed for the coalition's known members. These aren't desperate fanatics acting on impulse. They're educated, methodical, and patient. They've been planning this operation for months, possibly years. They've anticipated our likely responses and prepared for them. The weight of impending failure settled over the conference room like a physical presence. Each person at the table had built their career on the premise that American intelligence and military capabilities could overcome any threat, but they were facing an enemy that had systematically negated every advantage they possessed. The terrorists had turned geography, logistics, and time itself into weapons against the very people trying to stop them. Director Wellington stood and walked to the window overlooking the federal building's parking lot. Dawn was still hours away, but the darkness outside seemed to mirror the growing desperation inside the conference room. How long before we have to make the call to evacuate the water treatment facility? He asked without turning around. 6 hours, replied Colonel Hayes. After that, shutting down the system would take too long to prevent contamination if they've already introduced the biological agent into the processing tanks. The mathematics of the crisis were brutal in their simplicity. 32 hours remained until the coalition's planned attack window opened. 6 hours represented the point of no return for defensive measures. That left 26 hours to accomplish what every expert agreed was impossible: infiltrating a heavily defended terrorist stronghold, gathering intelligence on their specific plans, and either stopping the attack or providing actionable information. For a counterstrike, Dr. Blackwood had been working continuously for 18 hours, but adrenaline and caffeine kept her focused as she refined her analysis of potential approach routes. There is one possibility we haven't fully explored, she said, bringing up a detailed topographical map. The mining tunnels aren't the only underground access to the area. Historical records show a network of natural caves that connect to the tunnel system approximately half a mile from the coalition staging area. Colonel Hayes studied the new information with the practiced eye of someone who had planned countless military operations. The cave system would provide better concealment than the mining tunnels, but it would also be completely unmapped. An operative could become lost underground with no way to navigate back to the surface. Unless they had extensive experience with underground operations, Dr. Blackwood replied. Someone with cave diving or spelunking expertise might be able to navigate using basic equipment and dead reckoning. The suggestion sparked a flurry of database searches as analysts looked for personnel with the increasingly specific skill set required for the mission. Cave navigation experience, solo infiltration capabilities, mountain warfare training, the ability to assess biological weapons, and the willingness to undertake what everyone acknowledged was a suicide mission. The search parameters had become so narrow that finding a qualified candidate seemed virtually impossible. Agent Torres had been reviewing personnel files on her laptop, cross-referencing military service records with current security clearances and availability status. There are exactly 7 people in our databases who meet the technical requirements for this mission, she announced. 3 are currently deployed overseas, 2 are medically retired, 1 is in a position too sensitive to abandon, and 1. She paused, staring at her screen with an expression of confusion and growing interest. 1 is apparently working as a night shift security guard in this building. The room fell silent as everyone processed this unexpected development. Director Wellington turned from the window, his fatigue temporarily forgotten. What do you mean? In this building? Agent Torres was scrolling through additional information, her expression shifting from confusion to amazement. Maria Santos, former Marine Force Reconnaissance, 12 years active duty, Navy Cross recipient, extensive experience in solo infiltration and mountain warfare operations. According to her employment records, she's been working night shift security here for the past 3 years. Dr. Blackwood leaned over to look at the file data appearing on Agent Torres's screen. Her military record is extraordinary. Look at these mission summaries: solo operations behind enemy lines, successful extractions from hostile territory, multiple commendations for operating in underground and cave environments. Colonel Hayes was already pulling up additional classified files that required her military clearance to access. What she found there made her breath catch in her throat. This woman isn't just qualified for this mission. Her service record suggests she's uniquely qualified. She's completed operations that are almost identical to what we're contemplating. The irony of the situation was almost overwhelming. For hours, they had been searching desperately for someone with the skills needed to attempt the impossible. And that person had been walking the halls of their own building, checking door locks and monitoring security cameras. The disconnect between Maria Santos's current role and her extraordinary military background raised obvious questions about why such a decorated veteran had chosen such a humble position. There has to be a reason she left active duty and took a civilian security job, said Agent Torres. People with her level of training and experience don't usually settle for positions that require none of their specialized skills. Director Wellington was studying Maria's psychological evaluations from her military service, looking for clues about her motivations and current mental state. Her psych profiles indicate someone who thrives under extreme pressure, but values autonomy and dislikes bureaucratic oversight. The transition to civilian life might have been difficult for someone accustomed to high-stakes operations. The emergency team found themselves facing a new kind of dilemma. They had potentially found the person they needed to prevent a catastrophic terrorist attack, but approaching her would require asking someone who had clearly chosen a peaceful civilian life to return to the world of deadly covert operations. The mission they had in mind would test every skill she had ever learned, and push her to the absolute limits of human endurance. Dr. Blackwood was cross-referencing Maria's military service record with the specific requirements of their proposed mission. Her experience matches our needs almost perfectly. Cave operations, solo infiltration, biological warfare assessment, mountain terrain navigation. She's done all of it. But her last active duty assignment was 5 years ago. Physical conditioning and reflexes deteriorate quickly in special operations personnel, warned Colonel Hayes. Even someone with her background might not be capable of the demands this mission would place on her. The clock on the conference room wall showed 4:23 a.m. 29 hours remained until the coalition's attack window opened. The team had finally identified a potential solution to their seemingly impossible problem. But it came with its own set of complications and uncertainties. They needed to approach Maria Santos immediately, explain the situation, and ask her to volunteer for what everyone agreed was almost certainly a suicide mission. The question that haunted everyone in the room was simple but profound. Would someone who had served her country with extraordinary distinction be willing to risk everything one more time when millions of lives hung in the balance? At 4:31 a.m., Maria Santos was completing her third round of security checks when she noticed something unusual. The 7th floor, which normally remained dark and empty during her night shifts, showed signs of activity. Light spilled from beneath the conference room doors, and she could hear the low murmur of voices engaged in what sounded like an intense discussion. Her training automatically kicked in as she approached the area, her senses heightened by the break in routine that had become as familiar to her as breathing. She paused outside the conference room, not to eavesdrop, but to assess whether the situation required her attention as a security officer. The voices were too muffled to understand, but the tone suggested urgency and stress. Maria checked her logbook and security protocols, confirming that no late-night meetings had been scheduled for the building. Her responsibility was to investigate any unusual activity and ensure that proper authorization existed for after-hours use of federal facilities. Maria knocked on the conference room door with the professional courtesy that characterized all her interactions with building occupants. The voices inside fell silent immediately, followed by what sounded like hurried whispers and the shuffling of papers. After a moment, the door opened to reveal a man in his 50s wearing a rumpled suit and the expression of someone who had been awake far too long. "Good morning, sir," Maria said, maintaining the polite but authoritative tone she used when addressing potential security concerns. "I'm Maria Santos, building security. I noticed activity in this area and wanted to verify that proper authorization has been obtained for after-hours use of the conference room." Director Wellington studied the woman standing before him, trying to reconcile her modest security uniform with the extraordinary military record he had just been reading. She stood with perfect posture, her eyes alert and professional, but there was something in her bearing that suggested depths far beyond those of a typical night shift guard. Her request was entirely appropriate, but the timing seemed almost surreal given the conversation that had just been taking place about her. "Ms. Santos," Wellington replied, his voice careful and measured. "I'm Director James Wellington with the Department of Homeland Security. We're conducting an emergency briefing regarding a time-sensitive national security matter. Our authorization comes directly from the White House Situation Room." Maria nodded and made a note in her logbook, following standard protocol for such situations. But her trained instincts were picking up subtle details that told a different story than a routine emergency meeting. The stress lines around Wellington's eyes spoke of genuine desperation rather than bureaucratic urgency. The way he held himself suggested someone carrying an enormous burden of responsibility. Most telling of all, the other people visible in the conference room were studying her with an intensity that seemed disproportionate to her role as a security guard. "Sir, if you could provide me with the authorization number for my records, "I'll note it in the building log and continue my rounds," Maria said, maintaining her professional demeanor while her mind processed the atmospheric details that didn't quite fit the explanation she'd been given. Wellington exchanged glances with the other occupants of the conference room before responding. "Miss Santos, would you mind stepping inside for a moment? There's something we need to discuss with you that goes beyond building security protocols." The request was unusual enough to trigger Maria's tactical awareness. Her civilian life had been carefully constructed to avoid exactly this kind of situation, moments when her past might intersect with her present in ways that could shatter the quiet anonymity she had worked so hard to maintain. But her training also told her that people didn't conduct emergency meetings at 4:30 a.m. unless something significant was happening, and her instinct suggested that whatever was occurring in this conference room was both legitimate and important. "Sir, if this involves matters beyond my security responsibilities, I should probably contact my supervisor and follow the appropriate chain of command," Maria replied, though her tone indicated she was open to hearing more details about what they needed from her. Dr. Blackwood appeared at Wellington's shoulder, her laptop screen showing data that Maria couldn't see from her position in the doorway. "Miss Santos, we're aware of your background with Marine Force Reconnaissance. What we need to discuss relates directly to that experience." The words hit Maria like a physical blow, though years of training allowed her to maintain her composure. She had spent 3 years successfully avoiding any situation that might connect her current life to her military service. Her security clearance paperwork for the guard position had been processed through routine channels that shouldn't have flagged her specialized background. The fact that these people knew about her force reconnaissance experience meant they had accessed classified databases that required high-level authorization. "Ma'am, I'm not sure what information you're referring to," Maria said carefully, "but my current position is civilian security, and my responsibilities are limited to building safety and access control." Colonel Hayes stepped forward, her military bearing unmistakable even in civilian clothes. "Ms. Santos, we understand your desire to maintain your privacy, but we're facing a situation where your specific skills and experience may be the only thing standing between a terrorist attack and massive civilian casualties." The directness of the statement cut through Maria's carefully maintained facade. These weren't bureaucrats fishing for information or conducting a routine security review. The stress visible on their faces, the urgency in their voices, and the fact that they were meeting at this hour all suggested a genuine crisis. More importantly, Colonel Hayes had used language that indicated she understood the weight of what she was asking. Maria stepped into the conference room and closed the door behind her, her movement fluid and purposeful in a way that immediately confirmed everything the emergency team had read in her military files. She surveyed the room quickly, noting escape routes, potential threats, and the positioning of everyone present with the automatic assessment of someone trained to evaluate tactical situations in seconds. "What kind of situation are we talking about?" Maria asked, her voice carrying a different quality, now that she was no longer playing the role of a simple security guard. Wellington gestured toward a chair at the conference table, but Maria remained standing, positioned where she could observe everyone in the room while maintaining clear access to the door. Her body language had shifted subtly but unmistakably from that of a civilian employee to something much more alert and capable. Dr. Blackwood activated the main display screen, showing satellite imagery of a mountainous region marked with various tactical symbols and geographic features. 12 members of a sophisticated terrorist organization called the New Dawn Coalition have established a staging area here, approximately 15 miles from the Riverside Regional Water Treatment Facility. They plan to attack the facility within the next 28 hours and introduce a biological agent into the water supply that serves over 2 million people. Maria studied the imagery with the practiced eye of someone who had spent years analyzing terrain for military operations. Her questions were immediate and tactical. What's their access route to the target? What kind of defensive positions have they established? What's the composition of their team? Agent Torres pulled up additional intelligence reports, encouraged by Maria's direct engagement with the operational details. They're using the single access road to the facility, which they've been monitoring for weeks. Their staging area is in an abandoned mining complex with excellent natural defensive positions. The team consists of at least 12 individuals, many with military backgrounds, and they've acquired sophisticated weapons and surveillance equipment. And conventional response options? Maria asked, though her tone suggested she already suspected. The answer: Colonel Hayes spread tactical assessments across the table. Every approach we've analyzed results in detection and failure. The terrain heavily favors the defenders. They have anti-aircraft capabilities that prevent aerial insertion. And the time constraints don't allow for positioning sufficient forces to overcome their advantages. Maria nodded slowly, her mind processing the tactical situation with the speed and precision that had made her one of the Marine Corps' most effective solo operators. She could see the problem clearly: an enemy that had chosen their position brilliantly, prepared thoroughly, and created a scenario where conventional military force was neutralized by geography and logistics. "You mentioned my force reconnaissance background," Maria said, her voice now carrying the authority of someone who understood exactly what was being discussed. "What kind of unconventional approach are you considering?" Dr. Blackwood highlighted. "A route through the abandoned mining tunnels and natural cave systems that led to the terrorist staging area. Intelligence suggests it might be possible for a single operative to infiltrate their perimeter using underground passages. The mission would require someone with extensive experience in solo operations, cave navigation, and mountain warfare." Maria studied the proposed route with growing understanding of what they were really asking her to do. The underground approach was technically feasible, but extraordinarily dangerous. The operative would be completely alone, operating without communication or backup, in terrain that could prove as deadly as any human enemy. Even if successful in reaching the terrorist staging area, they would face a team of armed adversaries, with no support and virtually no chance of extraction. What would be the mission objectives once inside their perimeter? Maria asked, though she was beginning to understand that this conversation was moving beyond theoretical planning toward a direct request for her participation. Wellington's response was honest in its grimness: gather intelligence on their specific plans, identify the biological agent being used, and either sabotage their operation or provide actionable information for a targeted counterstrike. The operative would need to complete these objectives, knowing that extraction is unlikely. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. The room fell silent as everyone waited for Maria's response. They had laid out the situation with brutal honesty. Millions of lives at stake, conventional options exhausted, and a mission that offered little hope of survival even for someone with her extraordinary qualifications. The decision they were asking her to make would determine not only her own fate, but potentially the lives of countless innocent people. Maria walked to the window and stared out at the pre-dawn darkness, her mind weighing factors that went far beyond personal risk. She had spent 3 years building a quiet civilian life, precisely to avoid moments like this. But the training and instincts that had kept her alive through countless dangerous missions were telling her that everything these people had shared was legitimate and urgent. When she turned back to face the room, her expression had changed completely. The modest security guard had been replaced by someone whose eyes held the steady confidence of a warrior who had faced impossible odds before and found a way to prevail. "I need to see the complete intelligence package," Maria said, her voice now carrying the authority of someone taking command of her own destiny. "And I'll need detailed maps of the underground route, current weather forecasts for the target area, and a full briefing on what we know about the biological agent they're planning to use. The transformation was so complete that several people in the room found themselves sitting straighter, unconsciously responding to the presence of someone who radiated competence and determination. Maria Santos, the security guard, had stepped aside, revealing the Marine Force Reconnaissance operator, who had never really gone away. The reaction in the conference room was immediate and telling. Agent Torres couldn't suppress a small laugh of disbelief, the sound cutting through the tension like a blade. "You're serious? You actually think you can pull this off?" Her tone carried the skepticism of someone who had spent years in law enforcement and understood the difference between confidence and delusion. Dr. Blackwood looked up from her laptop screen, her expression mixing professional concern with barely concealed doubt. "Miss Santos, with all due respect, you've been working as a security guard for 3 years. This mission would challenge even active duty special operations personnel at the peak of their training and conditioning." Colonel Hayes leaned back in her chair, studying Maria with the clinical assessment of a career military officer. Her voice carried the weight of someone who had seen too many good soldiers die from overconfidence. "Ma'am, your service record is impressive, but that was 5 years ago. Physical conditioning deteriorates rapidly in our line of work. Reflexes slow down, muscle memory fades, and the kind of edge you need for solo operations behind enemy lines isn't something you can maintain while checking door locks." Maria remained standing by the window, her posture unchanged despite the waves of skepticism washing over her. She had expected this reaction. It was the same doubt she would have expressed if their roles were reversed. The disconnect between her current civilian role and the mission they were describing was so dramatic that questioning her capabilities was not only reasonable, but professionally responsible. Agent Torres was scrolling through Maria's personnel file on her tablet, highlighting dates and service gaps. "Your last active deployment was 62 months ago. Your last physical fitness evaluation was from before your retirement. We're talking about asking someone who's been out of the game for 5 years to attempt what active duty operators would consider a suicide mission." The criticism continued as more team members voiced their concerns. FBI Special Agent Rebecca Martinez, who had been silent during the initial briefing, finally spoke up with the bluntness that characterized federal law enforcement. "Look, we're all desperate here, but desperation doesn't change reality. This woman may have been exceptional 5 years ago, but we're talking about infiltrating a heavily defended terrorist stronghold through underground passages that could collapse and kill her before she ever reaches the target." Dr. Blackwood pulled up the tactical analysis on the main screen, pointing to specific challenges that highlighted the mission's apparent impossibility. Even if physical conditioning wasn't an issue, consider the technical requirements. The underground route involves at least 2 miles of unmapped cave systems, some passages flooded, others with ceiling clearances that would challenge someone half your age and size. The doubt in the room was palpable, and it came from people who understood exactly what they were asking. These weren't civilians questioning a military operation they didn't understand. These were professionals with decades of experience in counterterrorism, special operations, and crisis management. Their skepticism was rooted in genuine expertise and concern for both mission success and human life. Director Wellington found himself in the uncomfortable position of needing to advocate for a plan that even he wasn't sure could succeed. "The concerns being raised are all valid," he said carefully, "but we also need to acknowledge that every conventional option has been exhausted. If Ms. Santos believes she can attempt this mission, we may not have the luxury of questioning whether it's advisable." Colonel Hayes shook her head firmly, her military training overriding diplomatic considerations. "Sir, believing you can do something and actually being capable of doing it are entirely different things. We could be sending someone to their death based on outdated assessments of their abilities. Agent Torres had been running additional database searches while the discussion continued. I've been looking at success rates for similar operations conducted by active duty personnel. Solo infiltration missions in hostile territory have approximately a 30% success rate, even under optimal conditions with full support and extraction capabilities. This mission has none of those advantages. The statistics hung in the air like an accusation. Everyone in the room understood what those numbers meant. Even if Maria had retained all her skills and conditioning, the odds of success were devastating. The mission they were contemplating would be dangerous for anyone. For someone whose qualifications were 5 years out of date, it seemed like elaborate suicide. Dr. Blackwood continued her technical assessment, highlighting additional challenges that seemed to multiply with each passing minute. The biological agent they're planning to use adds another layer of complexity. Even if you successfully infiltrate their staging area, identifying and neutralizing a sophisticated biological weapon requires current training in chemical and biological warfare. That's not the kind of knowledge that remains fresh after years of civilian work. Agent Martinez pulled up personnel files for comparison, showing the qualifications of currently active special operations personnel. We have operators who are younger, stronger, currently trained, and specifically certified for exactly this type of mission. The fact that they're all unavailable doesn't mean we should settle for someone whose qualifications are expired. The word expired cut through the room like a physical blow. It was harsh but accurate, reflecting the reality that military skills deteriorate without constant practice and application. The Maria Santos, who had earned a Navy Cross and completed classified missions behind enemy lines, existed in military records. But the woman standing before them had spent 3 years in a civilian security job that required none of those exceptional abilities. Colonel Hayes stood and walked to the tactical display, pointing to specific elements of the proposed mission. Route. Look at this objectively. 2 miles of underground navigation through partially collapsed mining tunnels and unmapped cave systems. No communication with support teams. No backup if something goes wrong. No extraction plan if the mission succeeds. We're asking someone to volunteer for certain death based on skills they may no longer possess. The room fell into a heavy silence as the weight of their situation became clear. They had found someone with the theoretical qualifications for their impossible mission, but the practical reality of her current capabilities remained unknown. The terrorist attack was less than 27 hours away. Conventional options had been exhausted, and they were facing the possibility that their only hope was based on wishful thinking rather than realistic assessment. Agent Torres voiced what everyone was thinking. Even if we ignore the questions about current physical condition and skill retention, there's the psychological factor. Someone who has been out of combat operations for 5 years may not have the mental edge needed for this kind of high-stress situation. The transition back to lethal operations isn't something you can accomplish in a briefing room. Dr. Blackwood nodded in agreement, her scientific background making her particularly attuned to the importance of current data over historical records. Military performance is extremely perishable. Reaction times, decision-making under stress, the ability to function effectively in life-threatening situations, all of these deteriorate without constant practice. We're talking about asking someone to perform at an elite level based on abilities they haven't used in years. The criticism was relentless but fair, coming from people who understood the stakes involved. Millions of lives hung in the balance, and the margin for error was not existent. Sending someone on a mission they weren't qualified to complete wouldn't just result in their death. It would also eliminate any chance of preventing the terrorist attack through alternative means. Agent Martinez highlighted the time constraints that made the situation even more impossible. Even if we could verify her current capabilities, there's no time for mission-specific preparation. Elite operations require extensive planning, rehearsal, and equipment preparation. We're talking about improvising a solo infiltration mission. With less than a day's notice, Director Wellington found himself watching Maria's reaction to the sustained criticism, looking for signs of doubt or realistic self-assessment. What he saw was someone listening carefully to legitimate concerns, while maintaining the composure of someone who had faced skepticism before. Her expression showed understanding rather than defensiveness, which was either the sign of genuine confidence or dangerous self-delusion. The discussion had reached an impasse. The emergency team had identified their only potential solution, but the gap between what they needed and what they had was enormous. They needed someone at the peak of their abilities with current training and perfect conditioning. What they had was someone with the right background, whose actual capabilities were unknown and potentially inadequate. Colonel Hayes made one final attempt to inject reality into the conversation. "Ma'am, I've spent my career in special operations, and I've seen what happens when people attempt missions beyond their current capabilities. Good people die and objectives fail. The fact that you were exceptional 5 years ago doesn't mean you're qualified for this mission today." Agent Torres closed her laptop with a gesture that seemed to symbolize the futility of their situation. We're talking about sending someone into a situation where even current special operations personnel would face overwhelming odds. Asking someone whose qualifications are years out of date to attempt it isn't courage. It's desperation clouding our judgment. The words hung in the air like a final verdict. The emergency team had spent hours searching for a solution to an impossible problem, and when they finally found a potential candidate, the reality of the situation made even that hope seem illusory. They were facing the possibility that their search for a hero had led them to someone whose heroic days were in the past, and that the mission they needed to accomplish was simply beyond the capabilities of anyone available to attempt it. Clock on the conference room wall showed 5:17 a.m. 26 hours remained until the terrorist attack window opened. Time was running out, conventional options had been exhausted, and their only hope was being systematically demolished by people whose job it was to make realistic assessments of operational capabilities. The weight of impending failure settled over the room like a shroud, and everyone present began to understand that they might be witnessing the final hours before a catastrophic terrorist attack that they were powerless to prevent. Maria had listened to every word of criticism without interruption, her expression remaining calm and thoughtful throughout the sustained assault on her qualifications. When the room finally fell silent, she moved away from the window with a fluidity that immediately caught Colonel Hayes's attention. Her steps were measured, purposeful, and carried an economy of movement that spoke of someone who had retained more of her training than her critics assumed. "You're all absolutely right to question my current capabilities," Maria said, her voice carrying a quiet authority that hadn't been there during her earlier interactions as a security guard. 5 years is a long time in our business, and skills do deteriorate without practice. But there are some things you might want to consider before you dismiss this option entirely. She moved to the tactical display showing the proposed infiltration route, her eyes scanning the terrain with the practiced assessment of someone who had navigated similar challenges before. "First, you're assuming that I've been completely inactive since leaving the Marines. That's not accurate." Dr. Blackwood looked up from her notes with renewed interest. "What do you mean by not inactive?" Maria's response revealed information that wasn't contained in any official records. "I've been maintaining my physical conditioning through rock climbing and cave exploration. Every weekend for the past 3 years, I've been in the Blue Ridge Mountains, navigating underground systems that are very similar to what you're showing me here." Agent Torres frowned, clearly skeptical of this convenient revelation. "Recreational. Cave exploration is hardly the same as military infiltration operations." "You're right," Maria agreed, "but the physical demands and navigation skills are nearly identical. The difference is the presence of hostile forces, which brings me to my second point. She turned to face Colonel Hayes directly, her bearing shifting subtly but unmistakably towards something more military. "Ma'am, you mentioned that my reflexes and combat edge might have deteriorated. That's a fair concern, but it's based on an assumption that I've been living a completely civilian life." Director Wellington sensed that Maria was building towards something significant. "What aren't you telling us, Miss Santos?" Maria's expression grew more serious as she prepared to reveal information that would fundamentally change their assessment of her capabilities. "For the past 18 months, I've been working as a contractor for a private security firm that specializes in high-risk extractions and hostage recovery operations. My security guard position here is my cover employment." The room erupted in surprised murmurs as the implications of this revelation sank in. Agent Martinez was the first to voice what everyone was thinking. "You're saying you've been conducting active operations while working as a night shift security guard?" "Not active military operations," Maria clarified, "but civilian contract work that requires many of the same skills. Hostage rescues, asset recovery in hostile territories, personal protection for executives operating in dangerous regions. The kind of work where a mistake means death and success requires everything I learned in Force Reconnaissance." Colonel Hayes leaned forward, her skepticism beginning to shift toward professional interest. "What kind of operations are we talking about? And why isn't this employment history in your background files?" Maria's answer revealed the complexity of the modern private security industry and its relationship with government agencies. "The firm I work for specializes in operations that government agencies can't officially conduct. Corporate executives kidnapped in Somalia, archaeological teams trapped in unstable regions, journalists captured by hostile groups. We handle situations where official military intervention would create diplomatic complications." Dr. Blackwood was already opening her laptop to begin verifying this information. "If what you're saying is true, it would significantly change our assessment of your current capabilities." "It's true," Maria confirmed, "and it's also classified at a level. That explains why it doesn't appear in standard background checks. The firm's client list includes several Fortune 500 companies and at least 3 government agencies that prefer not to acknowledge their use of private contractors for sensitive operations." Agent Torres was processing the implications of these revelations with the rapid assessment skills that had made her effective in federal law enforcement. "Even if we accept that you've been maintaining your operational skills through private contract work, this mission is still beyond anything you've described. Solo infiltration of a defended terrorist stronghold is different from corporate security operations." Maria nodded in acknowledgement of the valid distinction. "You're absolutely right that this mission represents an escalation beyond my recent contract work. But there's something else you need to understand about why I took the security position here and how it relates to my actual capabilities." She moved to the conference room's secure computer terminal, entering access codes that immediately caught Director Wellington's attention. "I've had active top-secret clearance throughout my employment here, not for my security guard duties, but because I've been serving as an unofficial consultant for threat assessments related to this building and the agencies housed within it." The security codes Maria entered triggered a series of classified files that appeared on the main display screen. Wellington recognized the format immediately as coming from the most sensitive intelligence databases. "How do you have access to these systems?" "Because my retirement from active military service was never as complete as my official records suggest," Maria replied, her tone carrying the weight of someone revealing carefully guarded secrets. "I've been working with a joint task force that specializes in domestic counterterrorism operations that require deniable assets." Colonel Hayes stood up abruptly, her expression shifting from skepticism to something approaching shock. "You're saying you've been conducting classified operations while maintaining cover as a civilian security guard. Not conducting, Maria corrected, but preparing for. The task force identified several scenarios where official military response would be inadequate or politically impossible. My role has been to serve as a deep cover asset who could be activated if those scenarios materialized. The implications of these revelations were staggering. Agent Martinez found herself reassessing everything she thought she knew about the 5D. Woman standing before them. Are you telling us that your presence in this building during this crisis is not a coincidence? Maria's response revealed the true depth of the planning that had brought them to this moment. The threat profile represented by the New Dawn Coalition has been under assessment for 6 months. Intelligence agencies identified their interest in water treatment facilities, their acquisition of biological weapons capabilities, and their sophisticated operational planning. The Joint Task Force determined that conventional response options would likely prove inadequate. Dr. Blackwood was frantically cross-referencing the new information with her existing intelligence files. You're saying that someone anticipated this exact scenario and positioned you as a potential response asset? Not this exact scenario, Maria clarified, but something very much like it. A sophisticated terrorist organization with advanced capabilities targeting critical infrastructure in a way that would neutralize conventional military response options. The task force concluded that success would require someone with specialized skills operating in a deniable capacity. Director Wellington found himself grappling with the realization that what he had assumed was a desperate improvisation had actually been carefully orchestrated contingency planning. Who authorized this operation? And why wasn't I briefed on the existence of such a task force? Maria's answer revealed the compartmentalized nature of the most sensitive counterterrorism operations. The authorization comes from a level that compartmentalizes information to prevent exactly the kind of leaks that could compromise deep cover assets. Your need to know was activated tonight when the crisis reached the point where my deployment became necessary. Agent Torres was struggling to process the implications of operating in an environment where even senior officials weren't fully briefed on available assets. This means our entire assessment of the situation has been based on incomplete information. We've been planning as if we had no viable options when a solution was positioned and ready for deployment. The solution still requires acceptance of enormous risks, Maria pointed out, maintaining the honesty that had characterized the entire discussion. The mission parameters haven't changed. Solo infiltration of a defended terrorist position through underground passages with no backup and minimal chance of extraction. The difference is that I've been specifically prepared for exactly this type of operation. Colonel Hayes found herself reassessing Maria's capabilities based on this new information. But her military training kept her focused on practical considerations. Even accepting everything you've told us, the specific challenges of this mission remain. 2 miles of underground navigation, 12 armed terrorists with military training, and a biological weapon that could kill millions if something goes wrong. All true, Maria agreed, but there are advantages you haven't considered. My contract work has included operations in similar underground environments. I've maintained current training in biological weapons identification and neutralization. Most importantly, I've been studying the New Dawn Coalition's operational patterns and defensive strategies for months as part of my preparation for exactly this scenario. Dr. Blackwood looked up from her computer screen with an expression of growing amazement. The classified files you've accessed show detailed intelligence on the Coalition's leadership, training, and equipment that goes far beyond what we've been working with. This isn't just preparation for a general threat. This is mission-specific intelligence gathered over months of focused surveillance. Agent Martinez was beginning to understand the true scope of the planning that had preceded this crisis. You're telling us that while we've been scrambling to develop a response to this threat, you've been conducting detailed preparation for a mission we didn't even know was possible. The preparation has been extensive, Maria confirmed, but it's also theoretical until this moment. Intelligence is current and detailed, but intelligence and execution are different things. The coalition's defensive positions are formidable, their personnel are well trained, and the underground approach remains extremely dangerous regardless of how much preparation I've had. Director Wellington found himself facing a decision that would have seemed impossible just hours earlier. They had gone from having no viable options to discovering that a carefully planned solution had been in place all along. But the revelation also meant accepting that his understanding of the government's counterterrorism capabilities had been fundamentally incomplete. "What do you need from us to proceed with this mission?" Wellington asked, his tone indicating that he was moving from assessment to operational planning. Maria's response revealed the final pieces of the complex puzzle that had brought them to this moment. The Joint Task Force has pre-positioned specialized equipment and supplies at a staging area approximately 40 miles from the target zone. I need transportation to that location and authorization to proceed with mission execution. Colonel Hayes was already opening secure communication channels to verify the information Maria had provided. "I'm contacting the Special Operations Command to confirm the existence of this joint task force and validate your authorization for this mission. You'll find that confirmation comes from a level that requires special clearance codes," Maria warned. The operational security for this program is designed to prevent compromise even by well-meaning officials who lack specific need-to-know authorization. As the emergency team began the process of verifying Maria's claims and authorizing her mission, the entire dynamic of their crisis response was fundamentally transformed. What had seemed like a desperate improvisation was revealed to be the activation of a carefully planned contingency operation. But the risks remained unchanged. A solo infiltration mission against overwhelming odds with millions of lives hanging in the balance. The clock showed 5:43 a.m. 25 hours remained until the terrorist attack window opened. But for the first time since the crisis began, the emergency response team had reason to believe that they might have a realistic chance of preventing the catastrophe that had seemed inevitable just hours earlier. The verification process that followed Maria's revelations was unlike anything Director Wellington had experienced in his decades of government service. Colonel Hayes spent 27 minutes on encrypted communications with multiple agencies, each conversation requiring increasingly specialized clearance codes and authorization protocols. The deeper they dug into Maria's actual background, the more extraordinary the picture became. At 6:18 a.m., Colonel Hayes ended her final call and turned to face the emergency team with an expression that mixed professional admiration with barely concealed amazement. "Everything she's told us checks out, but it's more extensive than even she indicated. Maria Santos isn't just a prepared asset. She's been the primary contingency plan for this exact type of scenario for the past 2 years." Dr. Blackwood had been cross-referencing the newly revealed intelligence files with her existing threat assessments, and what she found painted a completely different picture of their operational environment. "The intelligence of the New Dawn Coalition is extraordinary. We have detailed psychological profiles of individual team members, analysis of their communication patterns, and assessment of their tactical capabilities that goes far beyond what our standard intelligence gathering produced." Agent Torres was studying personnel files that revealed the true scope of the Joint Task Force that had been operating beneath the surface of official counterterrorism efforts. This isn't just one prepared asset. There's an entire network of deep cover operatives positioned throughout the country, each specialized for different types of threats and operational scenarios. The implications were staggering from both operational and political perspectives. Director Wellington found himself grappling with the realization that his understanding of American counterterrorism capabilities had been fundamentally incomplete. compartmentalized to a degree that even senior officials operated with limited knowledge of available resources. The equipment and supplies Maria mentioned aren't just pre-positioned. Colonel Hayes continued, reading from classified manifests that had just been transmitted to her secure terminal. They include specialized underground navigation gear, advanced biological weapons detection equipment, and communication systems designed for solo operations in hostile territory. Maria moved to the secure terminal and began accessing additional files that revealed the true depth of preparation that had preceded this moment. The staging area contains everything needed for the infiltration mission, including detailed scale models of the Coalition's defensive positions based on months of covert surveillance. Agent Martinez was reviewing the intelligence summaries with the focused attention of someone who understood that their entire crisis response strategy was being fundamentally altered. The Coalition's personnel files show that 3 of their members have been under intermittent surveillance for 8 months. We know their individual specializations, psychological vulnerabilities, and tactical preferences. The revelation that their seemingly impossible mission had been planned and prepared for months transformed the entire dynamic of the emergency response. But it also raised questions about the level of surveillance and preparation that existed within American intelligence capabilities, and the implications of operating in an environment where even senior officials weren't fully briefed on available assets. Dr. Blackwood highlighted specific intelligence that directly addressed the mission's technical challenges. The biological weapon they're planning to use has been identified as a modified strain of Bacillus anthracis, engineered to survive standard water treatment processes. We have detailed information about its storage requirements, dispersal mechanisms, and neutralization procedures. The underground route has been mapped and tested, Maria added, bringing up detailed topographical data that showed the infiltration path with precision that would have taken months to develop. The cave systems have been explored and documented, including identification of stable passages, potential hazards, and emergency exit routes. Colonel Hayes was studying tactical intelligence with the practiced eye of someone who had planned countless military operations. The Coalition's defensive positions have been under observation long enough to establish patterns of guard rotations, communication schedules, and vulnerability windows. This isn't improvised intelligence gathering. This is comprehensive operational preparation. The emergency team found themselves recalibrating their understanding of both the threat and their response capabilities. What had seemed like an impossible situation requiring desperate improvisation was revealed to be a carefully orchestrated scenario where extensive preparation had created realistic chances of success. Agent Torres was reviewing the communications protocols that would govern Maria's mission, and what she found there demonstrated the sophistication of the planning that had preceded this crisis. The communication systems include quantum encrypted channels that would allow real-time intelligence sharing during the infiltration, without risk of detection or compromise. Director Wellington authorized the release of additional classified information that revealed the true scope of the Joint Task Force's capabilities. The surveillance of the New Dawn Coalition has been so comprehensive that we have real-time monitoring of their staging area, including thermal imaging that shows the exact location of personnel and equipment. Maria accessed the most recent surveillance data, showing her teammates thermal images and communication intercepts that had been gathered within the past 6 hours. The Coalition's current strength is 11 personnel, down from 12 due to 1 member leaving the staging area yesterday evening. Their defensive positions are exactly as we anticipated, and their attack timeline remains unchanged. The level of intelligence available was extraordinary, but it also highlighted the enormous risks that would still be involved in the infiltration mission. Dr. Blackwood pointed out the tactical challenges that remained unchanged, regardless of how detailed their preparation had been. Even with perfect intelligence, The underground approach requires navigating 2 miles of unstable passages in complete darkness while carrying specialized equipment, she said. The physical demands alone would challenge even the most prepared. Operative. The equipment includes advanced night vision systems designed specifically for underground operations, Maria replied, displaying technical specifications that showed the mission had been planned with remarkable attention to detail. The navigation gear includes quantum positioning systems that function in environments where GPS is unavailable. Colonel Hayes was studying the mission timeline and logistical requirements with growing confidence in its feasibility, but also increasing awareness of the political implications of such extensive covert preparation. The staging area is positioned to allow mission initiation within 4 hours of authorization. All equipment has been tested and maintained in operational readiness. The conversation was interrupted by an urgent communication from the White House Situation Room. Director Wellington took the secure call, and his expression grew increasingly serious as he listened to the briefing from Washington. When he ended the call, his announcement changed the entire dynamic of their crisis response. The President has been briefed on the Joint Task Force and Maria's mission authorization, Wellington announced. He's given direct authorization for mission execution and elevated this operation to the highest priority level. Additionally, he's authorized the declassification of specific intelligence that directly supports the mission. The declassified intelligence revealed surveillance capabilities that even the emergency team hadn't been aware of. Agent Martinez found herself studying real-time video feeds from inside the coalition's staging area, showing terrorist personnel conducting final preparations for their attack. The surveillance includes audio monitoring that has captured detailed discussions of their attack plans, Dr. Blackwood reported, reviewing the latest intelligence intercepts. We know their exact timeline, the specific biological agent deployment method, and their planned escape routes. Maria was reviewing the complete intelligence package with the focused attention of someone preparing for immediate deployment. The information available was far more comprehensive than anything she had expected, even given her extensive preparation for this type of mission. The coalition plans to begin their approach to the water treatment facility at 0600 tomorrow morning, she announced, reviewing the intercepted communications. They'll use a diversionary explosion at the main access road to draw security personnel away from the actual infiltration point at the facility's secondary intake system. Agent Torres was coordinating with transportation assets to move Maria to the staging area where her specialized equipment was waiting. We have helicopter transport standing by to get you to the equipment cache within 90 minutes. The flight path has been planned to avoid any surveillance systems the coalition might have deployed. The mission was becoming operational reality with stunning speed. What had seemed impossible just hours earlier was now proceeding with the efficiency of a carefully rehearsed plan. But the risks remained enormous, and everyone involved understood that success would require perfect execution under the most dangerous circumstances. Colonel Hayes reviewed the final mission parameters, with Maria ensuring that every detail had been considered and every contingency planned for. Once you begin the underground approach, you'll be completely on your own until you reach the coalition's staging area. The communication systems will allow monitoring of your progress, but we won't be able to provide assistance if you encounter problems. The mission's success doesn't require my survival, Maria replied with the matter-of-fact tone of someone who had accepted the risks involved. The primary objective is preventing the attack on the water treatment facility. Everything else is secondary to protecting those 2 million people. Dr. Blackwood had been running final calculations on the mission timeline and the coalition's attack schedule. If everything proceeds according to plan, you'll reach their staging area approximately 6 hours before they begin their approach to the target facility. That should provide sufficient time to gather intelligence and disrupt their operation. The emergency team spent the next 30 minutes reviewing final details and contingency plans, but the fundamental parameters were clear. Maria would infiltrate the terrorist staging area through underground passages, gather intelligence on their specific plans, and either sabotage their operation directly or provide actionable information for a targeted military strike. As the briefing concluded and transportation arrangements were finalized, Director Wellington made one final attempt to ensure that everyone understood the magnitude of what they were attempting. This mission represents our only realistic chance of preventing a catastrophic terrorist attack, but it also requires asking someone to risk their life against overwhelming odds. Maria's response demonstrated the mindset that had made her effective in the most dangerous special operations. "Sir, the odds don't matter when lives depend on success. 2 million people are going to sleep tonight, assuming that their water will be safe to drink tomorrow morning. Making sure that assumption is correct is worth any risk." The clock showed 7:24 a.m. 22 hours remained until the coalition's attack window opened. The impossible mission was about to become operational reality, and Maria Santos was about to discover whether years of preparation and planning would be sufficient to prevent one of the most devastating terrorist attacks in American history. Helicopter touched down at the staging area at 8:47 a.m., its rotors churning the mountain air as Maria stepped onto ground she had studied in satellite imagery for months, but never physically visited. The remote location had been chosen for its proximity to the underground route, while remaining completely invisible to any surveillance the coalition might have deployed. Ancient pine trees provided natural concealment, and the terrain features matched exactly what she had memorized from topographical maps. Captain Sarah Chun, the mission coordinator who had been waiting at the staging area, greeted Maria with the efficient professionalism of someone who understood that every minute counted. "Ma'am, all equipment has been tested and verified within the past 12 hours. We've maintained constant surveillance of the infiltration route, and conditions remain optimal for the underground approach." The equipment cache was housed in a camouflaged facility that had been constructed specifically for this type of operation. As Maria entered the underground bunker, she found herself surrounded by technology that represented the cutting edge of covert operations capability. Every piece of gear had been selected and configured for the specific challenges of infiltrating the coalition's staging area. The night vision system uses quantum amplification technology that provides visibility in complete darkness without any infrared signature that could be detected by enemy sensors. Captain Chun explained, helping Maria examine the sophisticated goggles that would be essential for underground navigation. Battery life is rated for 18 hours of continuous operation. Maria tested the equipment with the methodical approach of someone who understood that gear failure during the mission would likely mean death. The night vision system was more advanced than anything she had used during her military service, providing clarity and depth perception that would be crucial for navigating the treacherous underground passages. The communication system was equally impressive, incorporating quantum encryption technology that would allow her to maintain contact with the support team without any possibility of interception by coalition monitoring equipment. The system includes biometric sensors that will transmit your vital signs in real time, Captain Chun continued. The support team will be able to monitor your condition throughout the infiltration. The specialized clothing designed for the mission combined advanced materials technology with practical considerations for underground operations. The fabric was engineered to provide protection against both physical hazards and potential chemical exposure while maintaining the flexibility needed for climbing and crawling through confined spaces. The biological weapons detection equipment includes sensors capable of identifying the specific strain the coalition is planning to use, Captain Chun explained, demonstrating the compact but sophisticated analysis system that Maria would carry. If you can obtain a sample of their biological agent, The equipment can provide detailed information about neutralization procedures. Maria spent 43 minutes reviewing every piece of equipment, testing systems, and ensuring that she understood the capabilities and limitations of each component. The preparation was exhaustive because the mission would offer no opportunity to troubleshoot problems or compensate for equipment failures. The tactical intelligence provided at the staging area was even more detailed than what had been available in the federal building. Real-time surveillance showed the exact positions of coalition personnel, their movement patterns, and the specific locations where they had stored their equipment and biological weapons. Their communications indicate they're conducting final preparations for tomorrow morning's attack, Captain Chun reported, reviewing the latest intelligence intercepts. They've confirmed their timeline and verified that all equipment is ready for deployment. The surveillance data revealed that the coalition had established their staging area with professional competence that matched their reputation for sophisticated planning. Their defensive positions provided excellent fields of fire. Their communication systems allowed coordination between multiple observation posts, and their equipment was carefully organized for rapid deployment. Maria studied the thermal imaging of the terrorist staging area with the focused attention of someone preparing to enter extremely dangerous territory. Their guard rotation follows a predictable pattern, but the overlap periods provide very narrow windows for undetected movement. The approach will need to be timed precisely to coincide with their shift changes. The underground route that would take her to the coalition's perimeter had been mapped with extraordinary precision. Ground-penetrating radar had identified potential hazards. Structural engineers had assessed the stability of critical passages, and the entire route had been tested by other operatives to verify its feasibility. The most dangerous section is approximately halfway through the underground approach, Captain Chun warned, showing Maria detailed imagery of a partially collapsed tunnel system. The passage narrows to less than 3 feet in height for about 200 yards, and there are indications of potential rockfall. Maria reviewed the route planning with the careful attention of someone who understood that getting lost underground would be as fatal as discovery by enemy forces. The navigation system included multiple redundant positioning methods, but successful completion would ultimately depend on her ability to make critical decisions in complete darkness while under extreme physical and psychological stress. The mission timeline was brutally compressed by the coalition's attack schedule. Maria would need to complete the underground infiltration, gather intelligence on the terrorists' specific plans, and either sabotage their operation or provide actionable information for a military strike, all within a window of less than 18 hours. The support team will monitor your progress through the communication system, Captain Chun explained. But once you enter the coalition's defensive perimeter, you'll be completely on your own. We won't be able to provide assistance or extraction if the situation deteriorates. The reality of the mission's isolation struck Maria with renewed force as she completed her equipment preparation. She would be operating entirely alone against 11 trained adversaries in terrain they had spent weeks fortifying and defending. Success would require not just technical skill, but also the kind of mental toughness that allowed someone to function effectively when surrounded by enemies and cut off from all support. Captain Chun provided the final intelligence update before Maria began her approach to the underground infiltration point. Coalition communications indicate they're confident in their operational security and don't expect any interference with their attack plans. They're not maintaining heightened alert status, which should provide some advantage during your infiltration. The equipment check was completed at 11:34 a.m., leaving Maria with just over 18 hours to complete a mission that would determine whether 2 million people woke up to contaminated water that could kill them. The weight of that responsibility was enormous, but it was also familiar to someone who had spent years accepting missions where failure meant innocent people would die. Maria began the trek to the underground infiltration point with the steady pace of someone who had learned to conserve energy for the challenges ahead. The surface approach to the cave system took her through terrain that was beautiful in its ruggedness but also treacherous for someone carrying the specialized equipment needed for the mission. The cave entrance had been carefully concealed to prevent discovery by coalition surveillance, but it was also clearly marked for navigation purposes. As Maria prepared to descend into the underground passage system, she conducted a final equipment check and verified that all communication systems were functioning properly. "Alpha Base, this is Ghost," Maria transmitted using her old call sign. For the first time in years, beginning underground approach. The estimated time to target the perimeter is 6 hours. The response from the support team confirmed that all monitoring systems were operational and that real-time surveillance of the coalition staging area showed no changes in their defensive posture or attack preparations. Maria was entering the underground system with every possible advantage that extensive planning and sophisticated technology could provide. The descent into the cave system immediately presented the physical challenges that would characterize the entire underground journey. The passages were narrow, often requiring crawling or climbing techniques that tested both physical conditioning and mental endurance. The specialized equipment added weight and bulk that made every movement more difficult. The night vision system proved its value. Immediately as Maria navigated passages that were completely dark and filled with obstacles that could cause serious injury to someone moving without perfect visibility. The quantum amplification technology provided details that allowed her to identify handholds, assess passage stability, and avoid potential hazards. 2 hours into the underground approach, Maria encountered the first major obstacle that tested both her physical capabilities and problem-solving skills. A section of the tunnel had partially collapsed, creating a passage that was barely wide enough for someone to squeeze through while carrying equipment. The navigation required removing some equipment, pushing it ahead through the narrow opening, and then crawling through a space that left no room for error. The process was exhausting and time-consuming, but it also demonstrated that her years of preparation had maintained the physical conditioning and mental toughness needed for such demanding operations. The communication system allowed the support team to monitor her progress and vital signs throughout the underground journey. Captain Chun's periodic status checks confirmed that Maria was maintaining the timeline needed to reach the coalition's perimeter before their attack. Preparations entered the final phase. At 3:18 p.m., Maria reached the section of the underground route that would bring her within a few hundred yards of the terrorist staging area. From this point forward, any sound or disturbance could potentially alert coalition sentries and trigger a response that would end the mission before it accomplished its objectives. The final approach required moving through passages that brought her directly beneath the coalition's defensive perimeter. The sophisticated detection equipment carried by the terrorists was focused on surface approaches, but Maria understood that the margin for error was now essentially zero. "Alpha Base, this is Ghost," she transmitted in barely audible tones. "Approaching. Target perimeter. Beginning final infiltration phase." The response confirmed that coalition communications showed no awareness of her presence, and that their attack timeline remained unchanged. Maria was about to emerge from the underground system into a staging area occupied by 11 armed terrorists, who were preparing to launch one of the most devastating attacks in American history. The success or failure of everything that followed would determine whether 2 million people survived to see another day. At 4:47 p.m., Maria emerged from the underground system directly inside the coalition's perimeter, her heart pounding as she found herself just 50 yards from their main staging area. Through her night vision system, she could see terrorists moving between equipment caches, completely unaware that their supposedly impregnable position had been compromised. Moving like a ghost through the shadows, Maria photographed their biological weapons storage, documented their attack timeline, and identified their planned escape routes. But as she prepared to retreat with the intelligence, she discovered something that changed everything. The coalition had accelerated their timeline. They were planning to attack in 6 hours, not tomorrow morning. There was no time to extract and coordinate a military response. Maria made the decision that would define her legacy. She moved silently toward their biological weapons cache, using techniques perfected over decades of covert operations. One by one, she neutralized the terrorist. Sentries with precision that left them unconscious but alive. The biological agent storage required careful handling, but her specialized equipment allowed her to neutralize the engineered bacteria without triggering any alarms. When coalition leader Viktor Kozlov discovered the sabotage at dawn, he found a simple note: "Your water contamination plan has been neutralized. Surrender peacefully and no one needs to die." A concerned citizen. The FBI arrested 11 terrorists without a shot being fired. The biological weapons were secured, the water treatment facility remained safe, and 2 million people never knew how close they had come to catastrophe. Maria Santos returned to her security guard position the next week as if nothing had happened. When reporters eventually uncovered fragments of the story, they found only official statements about successful interagency cooperation and classified counter-terrorism operations. But Private Miller, the same young man who had brought her coffee every morning, noticed something different about the quiet woman who checked the building's doors at night. There was a satisfaction in her eyes, the contentment of someone who had faced the impossible and prevailed. 6 months later, when a new crisis emerged involving hostages in a collapsed mine, Maria Santos received another phone call. This time, she didn't hesitate. Because real heroes never truly retire. They just wait quietly in the shadows until their country needs them again. If this incredible story of hidden courage and sacrifice inspired you, smash that subscribe button and join our community of everyday heroes. We share amazing real-life stories every week about ordinary people doing extraordinary things. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment below. We love connecting with viewers from around the world. Have you ever met someone who seemed ordinary, but turned out to be extraordinary? Share your story in the comments. And if this tale moved you, share it with someone who needs to remember that heroes walk among us every single day, often invisible until the moment the world needs them most. Thanks for being part of our family, and we'll see you in the next incredible story.